interfaces as part of creating AI generation, AI apps. Originally, when I was thinking about, okay, I'm going to create an AI app, I was thinking we'll just have a Google text box. People just type in what they want, and we'll go on with our happy little ways. That's not really what people want. So then I started this little recipe generation program. This is because I know people with food allergies, and I'm a fussy eater, so it's nice to have a way to be able to create recipes. So in this case, you could say what kind of chef you are, what region of food you'd like, different adjectives about your food, if it's a menu or single recipe, what ingredient you want to have it centered around, and what kind of meal it is. And I thought that would be pretty helpful, but then as I was playing with it, I realized I don't really like that too much. Because I don't necessarily know what's different in chef levels, so I decided to add a help. So this will call a prompt to take into account your adjectives and perhaps your region, and it'll give you different information. It'll tell you what the chefs at each level could, what's different between them. And then I did the same thing with here because I was like, well, I don't know what kind of region I want to pick, because I'm not really familiar with a lot of different world cuisines, so I don't know what I want to do. So if I want, so then I that takes into account a lot more things, and it gives into a lot of detail about regions. And then you could paste in here. And then I was thinking, well, I'm doing all this, but I really should have a prompt. So I added this here, and so I said, I want to make a dessert with, I don't know, strawberry chocolate cheesecake that is dairy-free, gluten-free, and healthy, we'll say. So, and then up here you'll see that it's running. This is done with Streamlit, by the way. So I like Streamlit. So then it tells you, so the region is off because it's trying to figure out, well, what kind of region or food type. But it did fill in this. It did fill in this. And so if I wanted to say, well, I want to know what kind of region this would work for, I could click on that. And, oh, that's right, my backend's not running, so it won't feel work. I don't think. It might, but it may not actually need the backend for this. So it's going to Olama. So Olama is a application I've mentioned before where you can go and run a LLM locally, and it has a lot of nice features to it. This takes a little while, so we're probably not going to wait long enough for that. And then I wanted to also talk a bit about, so this is a tech program I'm working on that you guys will see later, but you might see it getting improved on over time. Really need to clean up this. It fails when someone folds, it stops. But really the only LLM right now for it is in analyzing your hand. And I find this to be helpful. So this will be used for deep learning. But what I really wanted to show was if you add, so here it's on localhost 9670. So if I go to 9670/docs up here in little tiny print, then you would see this, where you could see all my user interfaces, and you could then make calls. So if you're trying to figure out, well, why is analyze not working, then you could expand it. You could say, it'll give you a choice. We'll do a different one. Try it out. And then you can actually edit these fields, and then you can run it and see what's going on. That's immensely helpful. That's built into all the Fast API stuff. This one I didn't need prompts really, because it's very basic in terms of all you're doing is you're arguing with your computer. But I did add voice and video because sometimes if you get really, really into what you're trying to say, you don't want to take the time to type, because typing might drain you, might bring you down, and you just want to keep up with the argument. So voice or video works better. And so you could do that. And that becomes really helpful when people are working with your program. So you want to take into account that. You want to take into account that they should be able to drop in images, upload documents. There's a lot of different things that we haven't been doing with web applications that are more available now that we're using large language models. So think about how people may want to interact with it. Like I said, voice and video can be more reasonable now. And so there's that. And then let's see here. I want to deactivate this. And then I want to show you the poetry thing. Dash rm dash rf .bmv. And then, so if I say Python dash mvenv, so I always use .venv. The reason being because it doesn't show up here. Okay. And then I would do source. The advantage of always having the same name is no matter which directory I go into, I will always be able to activate whatever it is for that application, because I always use the same pattern. So there's benefits there. And then you just do pip install -r requirements. Always make certain that you did the venv, the source, before you do this, otherwise it installs it globally. Kind of defeats the whole purpose. So then you can look at, in this case, it's a poetry translation program, and I only have one index.html file, and that's here. And it's, so I have my CSS right here, and then I have a very simple UI, and then I have a very simple JavaScript. So since it's all very simple, there was no point in having multiple files. So it's all in one file. And then because I had loaded this up before I had ran the installs, it's showing these as errors, but they're not. And then you create a static file. This is what Pedantic was being used for, to have your request coming in. And then in this case, I'm going to be calling Ollama using the OpenAI endpoint. You can do it with the Ollama directly, but I find often I like the OpenAI endpoint, because if I want to change and use a different, if I don't want to use Ollama, I want to use something else, it's easier to, most LLM systems seem to have standardized on the OpenAI endpoint. So now one thing that you have to look at, sometimes you'll run into a problem with Gemma 3, and I think it's happened sometime with Llama too, you may end up wanting to do content replace. So it will have um, 3 of these, and then it'll say JSON before a JSON. So you would just say, I want to get rid of that. And then you also want to, it will end it with the same thing. So if you find that what it's sending to you is not what you want, it may be because it has this. It may not have just the JSON. So, but so you'll want to be careful about that. That happens more if I use the Olama library to connect, but it's just something to be aware of, that just because you tell it that you want JSON doesn't mean that it's always going to just give you JSON. Little detail. And then if we go to here, and so my startup script is very simple. It's cat startup. I export to variables. I run unicorn. I could put that in the main, and then I would just call main, Python main, but in this case, it's not really that big deal. Whoops. Then you start it up, and then you go back to here, and this was me playing around a bit with it. So we'll reload it. So you'll see that you explain what it's doing, paste the poem here. You can add more languages because you saw that it's just in the index.html. I like the placeholder to help explain how to use the application. So I have this one here. And so if we just go and we pick something. So we'll pick this poem. How shall I compare thee? So you put that in here. You could say, analyze translation effects. So what this will do is it's going to analyze and tell you, based on the target language, what kind of issues you might have, or basically I'm looking for, what am I going to put here? Like it says, keep same meter and general rhyming scheme, preserve the melancholic tone, for example. Unless you're a English major, you may not know how you want to translate this poem because you want to learn a different language, but you don't want to ruin the poem. There's a book I have called Le Tombeau d'Amoureux that talks a lot about translating poems. It's a good book if you're into foreign languages and poetry and translations. And so then it would talk about some things like the fact that it recognized that it's Shakespeare Sonnet 18. But then it would talk about the rhyming scheme and some different information. And so you could read through all that. Like, you probably don't want to tell it to keep the same meter, because saying that that's going to be a problem, and the rhyming scheme is going to be a problem. So you may not want to do that necessarily. And then so for example, if we just take something like this, okay, and then we go to here, and then we say translate poem, and then it'll run for a few minutes, and then it should come back with a translate poem. Now, what I think would be, just for giggles, what you can do is you could translate it into, like here I have this, and then, so it gave more detail also about that. And then what you could do is you could take that and you could translate it to English. it's funny. I don't have an English option there. I need to add that. You could translate into English, and then you could see how well did it really do as you go back and forth. But that's about it. So when you're always going to want to have some sort of a user interface, but take into account that people will be reacting with your application differently than they do a regular web application. Okay? And think about how can I take advantage of other uses. You'll see in other programs where I actually will sometimes put a very tiny model inside my web page, and I use it from JavaScript. And there's also routes for doing that. Okay, but thank you very much. Bye.